What is up, guys? Welcome back to the channel and welcome to a brand new video. Now today I do have a very interesting video for you all. As you can see right here, we have the new AW Polo GTI and the Golf 8 GTI, and we're going to be doing a back-to-back comparison. Now you guys are very familiar with this car. This is Angel Dust's car. His TikTok will be on screen right now. I know you guys like all the content that he makes on TikTok. Now I really do hope you guys enjoy this review. Let's get right into it.
As I woke up in the morning, just thinking about this night. As I woke up in the morning, just thinking about this night. As I woke up in the morning, just thinking about this night. As I woke up in the morning, just thinking about this night. Just thinking about this night.
Okay, so let's start with the exterior, and this one is a tough one in terms of which one looks better, because I think both cars actually look amazing. But let's just go through the features. Now both cars have the signature red bar that runs across the grille into the headlights. As you can see, you also find the same line on the Polo. Both cars have the IQ lights, and the lights themselves are just as capable, but the IQ branding on the Golf is just a bit more subtle compared to the Polo. I think because it's in red on the Polo, it stands out a bit more because it's in white. They both have red GTI badges, and to me the badges look exactly the same. Now the grills also look very similar, especially the lower bottom one with the honeycomb effect, as you can see also on the Golf. And on both cars you have fog lights. As you can see, the Polo has the fog lights. The Golf just so happens to have more lights than the Polo. And yeah, overall the front looks amazing on both cars. If we come around to the side, as standard on the Polo you get 17-inch rims. You can upgrade to the 18s. These are the 18s. And on the Golf, as standard you get 18s, and then you can upgrade to 19s. These are the 19s. Both cars have this little side GTI piece. If I go back to the Polo, this will be a difficult review. You have the same side piece. Now I've also noticed the Polo has a lot more body lines on the side, just looks a bit more aggressive. If I come around to the Golf, it's a little more subtle. You don't have as many side body lines, as you can see. Another thing I noticed is the roof spoiler at the back on the Polo just looks more aggressive and more interesting. As you can see, that's what it looks like on the Polo. And if we go to the Golf, it's just a bit more subtle. You don't get the two devil horns. And the rear, both cars are just designated a GTI badge, but the Golf of course has the two split exhaust tailpipes. As you can see, if we go to the Polo, you don't have a Polo badge, rather just the GTI badge like on the Golf, but you have the two twin pipes on the left. So let's compare the interiors of the cars. I think we'll start with the Polo, and this one I'll just go handheld myself just to not complicate stuff. Now I think I'll overlay a shot of the Golf interior so you can see a side by side. But what I've noticed is the steering wheel in both cars is exactly the same. What's different is the infotainment system and the instrument cluster. It's a bit more subtle in the Polo. It doesn't have as many menus, and you can't, like for instance in the Golf, you can change to different views. In here I think you only have two options when it comes to views. So that's one, that's two, and this one looks similar to the second one. So in the Golf you have a lot more menus. You can have one with just a rev counter, and you can display different gauges, a power gauge and whatnot. You can still display different gauges here, but it's not as many options that you get in the Golf. So in terms of infotainment systems, the Golf has a slightly more bigger infotainment screen, especially if you have the upgraded one, and the menus have a lot more options with the ambient lightings, and you can scroll down to go through other menus like the ESC. It just has a lot more inbuilt into it, and the whole design in the Golf just looks a lot more interesting with the layered dashboard, whereas here it just seems like a flat slab. But it's interesting how you can spec the red details in the Polo, which you can't in the Golf. In the Polo you also get a traditional handbrake, whereas in the Golf you get an electronic handbrake. And also, once again, in the Polo, the theme of tradition, you have a proper traditional gear lever. I think this one looks cooler than the one you get in the Golf. Whereas in the Golf you get the more minimalistic selector, which is a lot smaller, but it makes the interior in the Golf more roomy because it's not as big. And also the spacing in the Golf is just a bit bigger. That Golf in particular is also spec'd with induction charging, and this Polo doesn't have induction charging. And when it comes to seats, the seats in the Polo are not a two-piece like in the Golf. It's actually a three-piece: the headrest, the backrest, and the lower base. Whereas in the Golf, the headrest is actually integrated. Quality in the Polo is not as good as in the Golf because you have some hard plastics here, particularly on the doors. The top of the dash is soft, but it's not as good as in the Golf, but it still feels very solid in here, and it doesn't feel all too far off from the Golf. I think now let's jump into the Golf to see what we're dealing with. So I know I've been overlaying shots of the Golf interior, but I just want you guys to see like an actual back-to-back. Like, for one, the seats, as you can see, it's just a two-piece. It's the whole backrest and the base integrated headrest, and the coloring on the seats with the red and the white and the piping just looks a bit more interesting. As you can see, steering wheel just looks pretty much exactly the same. This Golf is not spec'd with the bigger infotainment screen, so you have the two knobs right there, but as you can see, the instrument cluster, the different views that you get in here. So the big rev counter one was 1, this is the second one, and you have this third one as the more minimalistic one. And also the options that all the menus you can display here, it's just a lot nicer. So I don't know why it won't let me cycle through that, but yeah, as you can see, this side there is a G meter, so you can have a power gauge. This side there's a power gauge, but I don't know why it keeps on displaying the gear selector. So yeah, there's a power gauge right there. Yeah, as you can see, there's a power gauge, and you can switch what you want to be displayed. I don't know why it's currently okay. Now let me try it. Your fuel gauge, consumption, for example, or you can have your consumption right there. You can have also a torque gauge, charge pressure, so that's the boost bar. So I think this just makes the Golf a bit more interesting. I'll put it back into park, and like I said, the layered dashboard, the more minimalistic center console. This area looks a bit similar, but in the Polo you have the handbrake. This one has induction charging right there. You also get 2 USB ports like in the Polo, and yeah, overall quality here is not far off from the Polo, but it's slightly better. And you do have the touch sensitive sunroof control, whereas in the Golf you have the more traditional button. And yeah, that's pretty much where I would leave it off with the exterior and interior. So now we'll check out the back seats on both cars. I'm just gonna move my camera bag. Here's one thing I want you guys to note. So the Golf actually has electrically operated seats, so when you open the door, the seat automatically moves back, just so you have enough space to make it easier for you to get in and out, basically. And once you start the car, it'll automatically move forward, so as to say. So That's why I had to move it forward a bit because I was going to be too cramped. Now, in the back of the Golf is obviously the bigger car. So, but back here it doesn't feel miles apart. It feels relatively similar. I'm not really sure if it's because the seats in the Golf are a lot more bulkier, but as you can see, knee room isn't all too bad. Leg room, I'll open the door so some light comes in. So leg room is quite good. The seat feels nice and high, so you have some room to stretch out. Just ignore these bottles right there, but the transmission tunnel is a bit thick and high, so the person sitting in the middle seat might feel a bit awkward. And back here we get 2 USB-C ports and rear climate vents, whereas in the Polo, as you'll see shortly, there's also a center armrest with through loading. Voila, cup holders, of course, that are not covered. So let's rush into the Polo. I'll jump into the driver side because it's in my sitting position. Now you'll see, in my sitting position, it feels a bit more cramped. Actually, let me leave the door open so some light comes in. The ISO on this camera isn't all too good. As you can see, in my sitting position, I'm about 5'8" in height, so my knees are a bit cramped up. Also, leg room down there is a bit too tight, but I have to be fair, this seat is a bit far back and low, and as you can see in the Polo, you only get 2 USB-C ports like in the Golf. But the reason why I say only is because there are no climate vents and no center armrest, as you can see, and no through loading. You don't get any of that in the Polo. So let's check out the boot spaces. So boot space, now the capacity on the Polo is 350 liters, so it's smaller than in the Golf. You have an underfloor where you find a spare wheel, and you have one pocket on the left, and you'll see shortly in the Golf you can see instantly the boot is bigger. Now loading lip is pretty much similar to the Polo, and you still get an underfloor with a spare wheel, but the capacity here is 380 liters, and you get 2 pockets rather than the one that you get in the Polo. And that's the boot space on both cars. So what mainly separates these two cars is the price. Now let's talk retail. Now base price on the Polo GTI is 554,000 rands. Base price on the Golf GTI is 759,000 rands. Now market value, both cars hit the market around 2022. Now the earlier Polos with relatively high mileage will set you back around 460,000 rands. Now the earlier 2022 Golfs, also with relatively high mileage, will set you back around 650,000 rands. Now the newer brand new cars, Polos that is, will set you back around 600,000 rands, and the newer Golfs can go all the way up to 1 million rands, which is insane. Now I feel like here, in terms of price, the Polo just offers better value for money, because you still get pretty much a lot of the stuff that you get with the Golf, just slightly less performance and slightly less tech, but it's really close. So that's why I feel like this offers better value for money. So let's get into the fun bit, which is the engine bay. Now both cars have a 2-liter turbo 4-cylinder. The Polo is making 147 kilowatts, which is around 200 metric horsepower and 320 newton meters of torque. The Golf, on the other hand, is making 180 kilowatts, which is around 245 horsepower and 380 newton meters of torque. Now both engines are actually the EA888, but in the Polo it's the Gen 3, and the Golf it's the Gen 4, and the turbo on the Golf is slightly bigger than in the Polo. So a tiny little puny turbo in here. And remember, this Polo has a Rogue Performance downpipe, and you can see it there. It's even changing color, whereas the Golf is completely stock. It's a stock downpipe. And yeah, there is an electronically controlled limited slip diff on the Golf. The Polo doesn't get it. And yeah, that's the other thing that mainly separates these two cars, is the performance that you get out of them. Now, 0 to 100 in the Golf happens in 6.4 seconds, whereas in the Polo it happens in 6.7 seconds. That's what VW quotes. Now, I think now let's have a sound comparison and we'll experience how the cars drive. So now remember, the Polo has a downpipe, so obviously it'll sound more fruity than the Golf. But I've also noticed, even this with a stock downpipe, it sounds more grumbly than the Golf on idle. Particularly, you can always hear that sound, whereas on the Golf it's muted. But when you drive, there are some burbles here on the Golf, but the engine really needs to be very, very warm. Whereas on the newer Polo GTIs, they've killed off the burbles on overrun that you used to get. And yeah, that's how the startups compare. Sounds fruity. Wherever that. So when these get really warm, they start popping and banging, so as to say. But the engine really needs to be very, very warm. But yeah, that's the sound comparison on the two cars. So guys, we are starting with the Polo. Oh, but I have to say, man, this thing feels just as fast. When you're driving either one, like, you can't really tell which one is quicker in terms of performance. I think it's only if you put them side by side and you have like a drag race or a rolling race, that's when you'll see the extra performance from the Golf, because we actually just did that. We had a bit of a roll when we were driving together while I was still shooting the review for the Golf. But yeah, like I said, this car offers great value for money, because you get a lot of the experience that you get from the Golf. So pretty much, I'd say about 95% of what you get in the Golf you get here, and the remaining 5% is the extra performance from the Golf, and that extra little bit of tech that comes with the Golf, like your ambient lighting and maybe a bunch of other stuff that you can't necessarily get on the Polo. But yeah, I'll just drive it for a bit so you guys can experience it also with me. But I'll also link down below the full review I did on this car. So if you're hearing a lot of tire noise, it isn't necessarily because the sound insulation on this car is horrible. It's because the surface is quite rough and bad. Like, it's horrible. I almost can't hear myself speak. Downshift. And man, that downpipe just makes it a bit more fruitier. It's just a fun little thing, hey? It just feels almost a bit more nimble than the Golf. Yeah, now the surface is a lot better. Oh, that downpipe. It just feels so dirty. You can just throw it around. I think even how the two cars are set up, this one is set up to be a bit more of a hooligan also, because if you throw it around tight corners, the rear wheel will start going up and all. Yeah, the suspension isn't necessarily as composed, but overall this can be a bit more fun because of the smaller size, the shorter wheelbase and all that jazz. So guys, you joined me inside the Golf 8 GTI. and I'm just going to drive spiritedly, because when it comes to daily driving comfort, it's good. Downshift. So we're currently stopped at a traffic light. I think I'll use this opportunity to try launch control. Go into ESC Sport. Gearbox is already in Sport, and next to me is a Polo GTI. So let's see how. I'm faster than a Polo GTI. So we just answered something. Is it faster than the new Polo GTI? Definitely. Unfortunately, you guys couldn't see that, but it is quicker. Wow. Woo! Once it gets going, it really goes. But I'm sure on video you can't even hear the DSG pops, because it's really muted inside there. I'll downshift. Second gear, foot flat. Oh. It is quick. Oh man, it flies. And I don't really want to say around corners it feels more composed than the Polo GTI, because where I drove the Polo GTI, there was some really twisty traffic circles with a bit of humps and stuff. I'm pretty sure the car overall is a lot more composed. It's bigger, it's more refined, it's probably set up a lot better on the Polo GTI, but it isn't all too far off from that car. Oh, that exhaust on the outside. Oh, once it's warm, it starts popping like crazy. Second gear. Oh man, I so wish we were on a proper twisty road. I think I need to drive this thing on my Kloof Pass. So yeah, I think I'll conclude it right here next. So I really do hope you guys enjoyed this review. Until next time, that's cheers from me.